Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Paul, and thanks to all of our witnesses for being here today. I want to start with a question to Ms. Goitin, please. Government's top priority is to keep its citizens safe, secure, and free. Classifying certain information is important to protecting national security, such as intelligence sources and methods, to be sure. But this committee has also heard from experts in the public and private sectors about the challenges with information sharing between government agencies and critical infrastructure owners and operators, right? So when we think about cyber in particular right now, what I hear from the private sector is we can't get any information that would help us do what we need to do to keep safe. It's information sharing necessary to help prevent terrorist attacks, combat cyber threats, and more. So in your experience, Ms. Goitin, how have you seen overclassification inhibit information sharing that's critical to public safety and security?
Thank you for that question. I think it is a major problem, and in fact, the 9/11 Commission talked about overclassification and how overclassification had actually stood in the way of sharing information among intelligence agencies that could have helped to prevent the attacks. So we paid a heavy price, possibly, for overclassifying information. What the 9/11 Commission pointed to was a culture of secrecy that is a relic of a Cold War. And that culture, which pervades a lot of the agencies we're talking about, is rooted in assumptions from the Cold War about who the enemy was and what we had to do to protect ourselves against the enemy that no longer hold. And as you're pointing out, in today's threat environment, sharing information is often critical to protecting national security. So that really is an enormous problem, and it raises its head in all kinds of areas. My written testimony has some other examples of situations where failure to share information has been problematic. I also, if I could, want to just briefly respond to Senator Marshall's question about whether this is a priority for this administration. I did want to point out that the National Security Council last June began an interagency process to look at the executive order and the classification system. That process, at least at the time, was given a year. If this administration comes out with an executive order that includes all the reforms we're talking about today in June, that will greatly diminish the need for legislation, although Congress will still need to ensure that there are adequate funds. However, if it appears that no such order is forthcoming in the near future or in the foreseeable future, or if the order doesn't have adequate reforms, then again, that's the situation where I really think Congress needs to step in to protect democratic accountability, the rule of law, oversight, and, as you said, national security.
Well, I appreciate that very much, and that's a good marker for us to look at. I want to talk to you, too, Ms. Goitin, about the financial costs here. I am chair of the Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Spending Oversight, which is tasked with protecting and saving taxpayer dollars. Toward that end, I am concerned about ways in which overclassification of federal documents contributes to waste, fraud, and abuse. So what are the financial consequences of overclassification? Specifically, what factors contribute to those consequences?
Overclassification greatly increases the amount of effort and resources that need to be put into protecting the information. It also requires costs to be spent on clearing secure personnel. I think the reason we have, over 4 million people who have security clearance to access classified information is because even people who are performing relatively low-level or non-sensitive tasks actually need a clearance to do their work. And certainly the systems that are used to process classified information, the physical storage for classified information, all of these cost money. I think we don't even know how much money they cost. The last figure that we have, which is from a few years ago, I think, is $18 billion. But the director of ISOO has flagged in various ways that he's not confident in the accuracy of that information. And I think it's likely to actually be much more than that. And of course, we are not talking about the indirect costs, the inefficiencies and the weaknesses in some of the policies that are a result of information not being shared and vetted and improved through transparency and public participation.
Well, and does overclassification allow federal agencies to hide waste, fraud, and abuse?
Absolutely. It's one of the main reasons, I think, why why the classification system is misused.
I want to follow up with you on that, but I want to get to a couple of more questions. A question to Mr. Fitzpatrick. The backlog of government documents that are overdue for declassification is large, as you have noted, and likely too big to be addressed by human review alone, as we were just talking about. And you touched on this already with Senator Peters and with Senator Marshall, but we've talked about technology solutions that can assist federal workers in addressing the backlog without jeopardizing ongoing security matters. But based on your experience in the federal government, which federal agency should lead or be involved in developing these technology solutions?
Well, I thank you for the question. It's incredibly important. I believe that the information technology budget of the U.S. government is already spending dollars on automated artificial intelligence and machine language. So one of the challenges here is to take the solutions that are being built for other purposes and apply them to this problem, right? And it would take somebody at the federal CIO level, and my recommendation, guided by an ISO director that is charged with the responsibility to say, listen to these agencies, they are starved of these resources. If they had them, here's what they would do. So the ideas are there. The technology application is, I think, the key thing, and it has to happen from the OMB budget level.
Okay, thank you. One last quick question to Ms. Goyton. You testified that the federal government's current incentive and penalty structure encourages individuals to err on the side of overclassifying information rather than declassifying information. At the same time, classification is obviously essential to protecting national security interests. So how do you recommend striking the right balance between reducing incentives to overclassify while protecting our national security?
Well, I think we'd have to go a long way in the other direction before we had to worry that we were making it too easy for people to not classify information. So I think there's a lot of room to work with. I do think absolutely there need to be administrative penalties for mishandling classified information, failing to protect classified information in cases where it's quite clear that that information required protection. But one thing that I think does need to be done is to provide a safe harbor for officials who make good faith decisions not to classify or not to mark information in situations where the classification status of that information truly is ambiguous. And right now, I don't think officials feel free to exercise their judgment, their reasonable judgment in that direction. And then on the flip side, as I was saying earlier, we need to have some kind of accountability for people who are misusing the classification system for reasons unrelated to national security.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.